the false society of men, for earthly greatness, all heavenly comforts rarefies to air, says Henry David Thoreau. Today, our fingers from excessive toil have become too clumsy and tremble too much that the laboring men have no leisure for a true integrity day by day. We cannot afford to sustain the manliest relations to men. Our labor always get depreciated in the market. According to the philosophy of simple living, the harsh reality of man is that he has no time to be anything but a machine. Most men, even in this comparatively free world, through mere ignorance and mistake, are so occupied with the unnecessary materialistic gain of life that its finer fruits cannot be plucked by them. The learned societies and great men says, laying up treasures which moth and rust will corrupt, and thieves break through and steal. It is a fool's life, as they will find when they get to the end of it, if not before. Leo Tolstoy said, "What a man thinks of himself, that it is which determines, or rather indicates his fate. According to the essential laws of man's existence, the necessaries of life for man can be distributed under the several heads of food, shelter, clothing, and fuel." Henry David Thoreau wrote in his book, Walden, "Until we have secured food, shelter, clothing, and fuel, we must prepare to entertain these as true problems of life, with freedom and a prospect of success." According to Thoreau, man has invented not only houses, but clothes and cooked food, and discovery of the warmth of fire, and the consequent use of it. By proper shelter and clothing, we legitimately retain our own internal heat, but with an excess of these, or of fuel, that is, with an external heat greater than our own internal, may not cookery properly be said to begin. According to Liebig, for a simpler living, it's important to understand man's body is a stove, and food the fuel which keeps up the internal combustion in the lungs. In cold weather, we eat more, in warm less. Science says human heat is the result of a slow combustion, and disease and death take place when this is too rapid, or for want of fuel, or from some defect in the draft, the fire goes out. Of course, the vital heat is not to be confounded with fire, but so much for analogy. Thus, food may be regarded as the fuel which keeps up the fire within us, and fuel serves only to prepare that food or to increase the warmth of our bodies by addition from without. Shelter and clothing also serve only to retain the heat thus generated and absorbed. Needless to say, the grand necessity, then, for our bodies is to keep warm, to keep the vital heat in us. That's why Henry David Thoreau says, fuel, except to cook our food, is then unnecessary. Hermit, philosopher, and the old settler says, the luxuriously rich are not simply kept comfortably warm, but unnaturally hot. Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only not indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. Therefore, with respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest have ever lived a more simple and meager life than the poor, says Diogenes of Sinope. The ancient philosophers, such as Buddha, Mahavir, and Diogenes of Sinope, were class apart in regard to simpler living, as none has been poorer in inward riches, none so rich in outward. The same is true of the more modern reformers, like Leo Tolstoy, Henry David Thoreau, Gandhi, and Mother Teresa. They all promoted simplicity, also known as voluntary poverty, a life of simplicity, independence, and magnanimity ultimate goal, is to solve problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically. When a man is warmed by these several modes which I have described above, what does he want next? Surely not more warmth of the same kind, as more and richer food, larger and more splendid houses, finer and more abundant clothing, and the like. When we already obtained those things which are necessary to life, there is another alternative than to obtain, says Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau wrote in his book, Walden, "My purpose in going to Walden Pond was not to live cheaply, nor to live dearly there, but to transact some important business with the fewest obstacles, and not to be hindered from accomplishing it." The Thoreau says, "I have always endeavored to acquire strict business habits. They are indispensable to every man. Today, society worship not the graces, nor the parse, but fashion. Looking at today, rat race, of consumerism, I remember the lines of Henry David Thoreau. He says, and I quote, "The head monkey at Paris puts on a traveler's cap, and all the monkeys in America do the same. The childish and savage taste of men and women for new patterns in fashion may have discovered the particular figure which this generation requires today, and the manufacturers have learned that this taste is merely whimsical. For example, of two patterns which differ only by a few threads, more or less of a particular color, the one will be sold readily, the other lie on the shelf, though it frequently happens that after the lapse of a season, the latter becomes the most fashionable. As for a shelter, we can't deny that this is now a necessary of life. Man wanted a home, a place of warmth or comfort, first of warmth, then the warmth of the affections. However, many a man is harassed to death to pay the rent of a larger and more luxurious box. We need to remind ourselves, economy is a subject which admits of being treated with levity, but it cannot so be disposed of. We can live comfortably in a simple house that is covered very neatly, tight, and warm. We are endeavoring to solve the problem of a livelihood by a formula more complicated than the problem itself. This is the reason most of us are poor. In respect to 1,000 savage comforts, though surrounded by luxuries, according to minimalist lifestyle, our houses are such unwieldy property that we are often imprisoned rather than housed in them. We all know one or two families and friends, at least in our surrounding, who, for nearly a long time, have been wishing to sell their houses in the outskirts and move into the village, but have not been able to accomplish it, and only death will set them free. Philosophy of Simplicity says, while civilization has been improving our houses, it has not equally improved the men who are to inhabit them. It has created palaces, but it was not so easy to create noblemen. Thus, we must ask, shall we always study to obtain more of these things, and not sometimes to be content with less? Why should not our furniture be as simple, says Henry David Thoreau. Is it a good argument our furniture should be more complex than the others, in proportion as we are morally and intellectually their superiors? At present, our houses are cluttered and defiled with it. Henry David Thoreau, while writing about less is more, says, I had 3 pieces of limestone on my desk, but I was terrified to find that they required to be dusted daily. When the furniture of my mind was all undusted still, I threw them out the window in disgust. Today, materialism has increased to such extent that, in airlines, we are inclined to spend more on luxury than on safety and convenience, even if it threatens our lives. Men have become the tools of their tools. Henry David Thoreau, write in his book, Walden, I learned from my experience of 2-year farming that if one would live simply and eat only the crop which he raised, and raise no more than he ate, and not exchange it for an insufficient quantity of more luxurious and expensive things, it would cost incredibly little trouble to obtain one's necessary food. According to Thoreau, a man may use as simple a diet as the animals and yet retain health and strength. He says, yet men have come to such a pass that they frequently starve, not for want of necessaries, but for want of luxuries. However, we need to remind ourselves, man is an animal who more than any other can adapt himself to all climates and circumstances. In short, I am convinced, both by faith and experience, that to maintain one's self on this earth is not a hardship, but a pastime, if we will live simply and wisely. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more empowering content. And if our content has inspired you, consider supporting our channel by becoming a member or giving super. Your contributions enable us to keep delivering valuable and uplifting content. Thanks for watching.